All right, welcome back. I'm sure a lot of you are energized if you watched my last interview, which was really a display of how erratic YouTube is with the connection with Sis and Shane. But I'm here with, hold on, Fei-Yang, I see that there's a little feedback on my side. 1 second. Hold on. Let me mute this. Sorry about that. I'm here with Sun Fei-Yang. Where do you live right now? You live in Chicago, did you say?
That's right. I live in Chicago.
So he is from he's from China originally. His family is from China. Were you born here in the United States?
So I was born in China, and I moved to Chicago when I was a kid.
And we're going to discuss today Mao Zedong, the former chairman of the Communist Party, the founder of the modern People's Republic of China, a little of his own personal history. Let's start out with how Mao came to power now. Let's remember that China was for millennia kind of a feudal society, monarchies, empires, and the last empire, the Qing dynasty, ended, I think it was 1911, is that correct?
1911, 1912, pretty close, something like that.
And then after that, there was a central figure who took over. Sun Yat-sen was the leader of the first Republican government in China, and then there was Chiang Kai-shek. Can you explain briefly for the viewers? I know we don't have a lot of time, but why is it that Chiang Kai-shek was, how did he give way to Mao Zedong becoming the communist ruler of China?
So the Republic of China was mostly located in the south, and it was a pretty weak and ineffectual government. China was overrun with warlords that basically controlled their own regions, especially prevalent in the north. And when Sun Yat-sen died, he was succeeded by Chang, who was a general by trade. He wasn't really a politician. He was quite the strong man, and he had the task of both pacifying the warlords at first, and then also fighting off the Japanese second. And during that time, there was also a growing communist movement in the South. And so he was kind of stuck fighting both the communists and the Japanese. And he was basically forced to stop fighting with the communists, ally with them for the purpose of beating Japan. But what happened is that the nationalists spent a lot of time, money, and manpower fighting the Japanese, while the communists more or less bided their time in the mountains. There's really only one major offensive the communists participated in. And so by the end of the war, the nationalists were somewhat weakened, and the communists were much stronger than they had been pre-war. And I would like to point out that Mao was not in charge of the Communist Party for the longest time. During the Long March, in which they were chased by the nationalists across China, he power struggles along the way, and he kind of maneuvered himself to the top. But at the very beginning, he was actually kind of a minor figure in the Communist Party, and only rose to significance toward the end. So in the ensuing Chinese Civil War, Chang was seen as very ineffectual, corrupt. His government wasn't very popular, and he lost many battles to the communists. And most critically, the U.S. decided to stop supporting him because they thought he was unreliable, undependable. He was wasting their money, and they really thought he was a lost cause. And so without American support, the nationalist government collapsed, and they had to flee to Taiwan. So that's really how the communists came to power. And then Mao founded the People's Republic in 1949, 4 years after World War II ended.
So we have and China has never really experienced Western democracy in the manner that we've experienced. Do you think that at least that there is some blame on the part of the nationalist government that they were not able to create a society that was truly representative and participatory for the average Chinese person? Do you think maybe that the transition from a monarchy to a republic was too fast?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, as you mentioned before, it was a feudal society. There were a lot is mostly agrarian, and the land reform was desperately needed. Like the land was concentrated in the hands of the warlords and a few rich people, and so there were a lot of peasants who really had nothing to their name, and that's why communism and especially Maoism was so popular to them. Right? On the other hand, the nationalists were seen kind of as on the side of the rich and of the rich peasantry, the city people, and so they really couldn't drum up too much popular support in the countryside. So, I it's partly to blame on the half part of the nationalists, but also Chang himself was not really a good politician. He was very unpopular. He was a hard man. He was more suited to be a strongman dictator than a leader of any kind of representative democracy.
So then let's get into Mao's China itself. Now you mentioned that your grandparents did live during his era. Can you tell me, and maybe you can expound upon it because I don't know how to phrase the question. Would you say that there was an improvement or a deterioration of conditions for your family in particular under Mao?
So I would say that conditions had actually improved for the first part of Mao's rule. There was a lot of land reform, and a lot of the peasants who really had nothing, we got something. There was like land parceled out, even if they were like on communes and like people were working the land together. It was still an improvement from feudal society. It really started to go south around the Great Leap Forward, which was one of Mao's big ideas, and that's really where like it started going downhill. He decided that he wanted to catch up to steel production in England, and he thought the best idea to get to that steel production target was to just mobilize absolutely everyone to start producing steel. So, all the farm workers, all the farmers were pulled off the land. They were told to build steel kilns in literally their backyards, in the streets, and people were donating their kitchen utensils, their pots and pans, literally anything with iron in it to be melted down and made into steel. Now, it seems ridiculous now, but that's what they had gotten the entire country to do. And the steel that came out of it was more or less unusable, which you can imagine. The iron's coming from like your cooking pots and pans and things like that. And the crops were just withering in the fields because there was no one to collect the crops. They sent women and children out there and the elderly, but obviously they can't bring in the whole harvest. And so the Great Leap Forward sparked like a huge famine. And our family was actually kind of one of the lucky ones. Like, my mom's generation, my grandparents didn't have any children that perished during that famine, but it was a really tough period. They told me that they were eating like the leaves off of corn. They were eating tree bark in one particularly difficult year, but that was a really hard time, and there was a lot of starvation in China, and that's where you get like those massive death figures from the Great Leap Forward. It wasn't like in other countries that it wasn't due to mass purges, it wasn't due to death camps or anything. It was simply just like pure out starvation.
So the episode, it's not an episode. It really was what it was like about 3 or 4 years or so with the Great Leap Forward, and I did read about it. There's a book that I read called Mao: The Unknown Story by Chang, that I read probably, I want to say 11 years ago, and it really changed and this is coming from somebody I have relatives who perished in the Holocaust, but this has to be, and I'm going to take a liberty myself. I personally, after reading this book, I considered what happened in China to be the worst abuse of humanity in human history, in recorded history, not to be redundant, and bar none, worse than Cambodia, worse than World War II. But there still happen to be people in the United States and in Peru and obviously China has never repudiated Mao. Do you think that the characterization of him as this awful, venal, greedy dictator is too harsh, or that we're really scaling back on it? Because a lot of Westerners don't really read about Mao we're a little too focused on Europe.
So I would push back a little bit on that because the nature of the Great Leap Forward, it was Mao was not trying to kill Chinese people. He was not trying to purge the society of undesirables at this point, at least. Like, he was trying to move Chinese society forward, and it was a terrible idea, and it really backfired. A lot of people died, but he wasn't like Hitler. He wasn't trying to exterminate a race. He wasn't like Pol Pot in Cambodia, where he was trying to rid society completely of undesirables. So there is that element of dehumanization that I think wasn't quite there yet. That's a completely different story once we get to the Cultural Revolution, in which you did start seeing those kind of purges. But it honestly was a well-intentioned, extremely poorly planned, extremely poorly executed strategy. And another reason that it was so bad was that about 1 year into the Great Leap Forward, internal elements in the Communist Party started to criticize Mao. And this general called Peng Dehuai, who was China's big war hero, not just during the Civil War but also in the Korean War, he was criticizing Mao. He said, Mao, like, this is an absolute failure. We've got to stop. And at the Lushan conference, Mao was like deeply troubled by that. He felt personally attacked because he thought Peng was his friend, and he kind of made the decision then to just double down on the Great Leap Forward, because before that, he had expressed to other colleagues that he felt he had made a mistake and he was planning on ending the Great Leap. So really that act there kind of just exasperated the problem and extended the Great Leap Forward a couple of years. So, at least for this thing alone, I wouldn't say Mao is the absolute worst. Like, if you look at Pol Pot, he killed a quarter of Cambodia's people. Like, as many people as died in the Great Leap, that doesn't begin to approach a quarter of China's population. So it's
I think like the reason that I made that, and I don't think it was just based. The Great Leap Forward, of course, was the first example, and I think that
yeah.
the reason after I read the whole book though was not just the way that he had these policies. There was I think it was called the 100 Flowers campaign, was another bizarre abuse of the free press that he did, that he ended up creating a false free press just in order to find his critics and be able to murder them with that much more efficiency and to find them easier. I think that based on, I can't consider myself a historical expert, but the thing that really stood out to me was his vindictive personality to the people surrounding him. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing the names right, but Zhou Enlai and Liu Shaoqi. And in the Cultural Revolution, he kind of bore those teeth to his surrounding acolytes, and to a lot of everyday Chinese people, like the teachers especially. Um, so let's talk a little about that. I know we're a little pressed for time. Why exactly
Yeah,
did he
absolutely.
need a cultural revolution after the Chinese Revolution?
Oh, so that's very easy to explain. So after the Great Leap ended, like, Mao was, his reputation was in tatters, and they wanted to preserve him as the head of the party in the country, but more or less he was kind of stripped of power, and like, people like Deng Xiaoping, who later was also became premier of China, but other people started to take more of a lead role, and Mao was kind of shuttered into the background. And so the Cultural Revolution was really Mao's attempt at retaking power. Like, it started with this poster that of Mao's words that a student at Beijing University put on the wall, and what it translates to is bombard the headquarters. And what Mao was trying to tell the students was that the Communist Party has become corrupt. Like, the headquarters, Liu Shaoqi, Zhou Enlai, all those people, they've become corrupt, and we need to destroy them. And so he was using this kind of students and like this popular uprising to reestablish himself back in power. So it was a very cynical power grab. It wasn't, I don't think he necessarily really believed that China had to destroy the four olds. He had to, purge all of the elements of old society. But at its core, it was a way of him to get himself back into center and, reestablish his power in China. So that's why he needed the Cultural Revolution. He couldn't have done it any other way. he was fighting with elements in the military too, so he couldn't have counted on the military to back him up. It was more or less he needed someone outside of the establishment to help him to retake power within the establishment.
Yeah, I think what really stuck out to me about the Cultural Revolution, I talked to this with another YouTube creator who's like a real power on the platform, Anthony Logan. I encourage you to check out his show. But the thing, and he talks about it too with Mao, that the Cultural Revolution, one of the elements that they really promoted was disrespect for traditional Chinese culture and tradition. Sometimes religious, it's not the same thing, the way that we think of religion in the West, but the artifacts, Chinese traditional Chinese art, teachers, the elderly, that type of element. Do you think that this is a way that we kind of learn about it in the West? Is it correct in saying that he was trying to undermine any other cultural and social authority besides himself?
So I think his main goal was reestablishing power, and that was, those were elements of his message to the students. And sometimes the students in the Red Guards, they just took it too far themselves. Like, they were outside of Mao's direct control. So Mao wasn't able to. Sorry, I'm getting some background noise. I'm going to move a little bit. So Mao wasn't personally directing them to do everything. So I'll give you one example. The tomb of Confucius in Shandong, that was actually vandalized by Red Guards. They even tried to dig up Confucius's corpse. They were able to dig up the corpses of some of Confucius's relatives who were buried in the same graveyard, and they strung them up on a tree. And eventually, someone under Mao had to tell them to take those down. That's disgusting. Why did you do that? But it just goes to show that, like, once the people and the students within the movement got really riled up, they started to take things into their own hands. And that's why you saw this massive destruction of cultural artifacts, which I don't think Mao necessarily wanted. It was just kind of a byproduct of the way he went about the Cultural Revolution. And I do want to leave this bit with your viewers too. But, when you think about the Cultural Revolution, you think about masses of students congregating outside Confucius's tomb trying to blow it up. Like, they pulled out dynamite to blow up the tomb doors. You kind of compare that to this recent urge in the U.S. to take down all of these statues, in Virginia, in Richmond, and Dallas. And, there are some interesting parallels there.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that the moment I realized that there's something, this was before the Confederate issue, was when the similarity, the moment I realized that this is becoming a real problem was the Evergreen State College confrontation, where they took over the college and they started to berate teachers and administrators and make demands and start calling for basically a social revolution on campus. And I think that yes, the Red Guard was kind of this element that got out of control of Mao himself. Unfortunately, today we will not be able to go as far as I'd like to go and talk to Mr. Sun Fei Yang about this topic that's fascinated me for years. But stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more, content about Maoism, both in this interview series and some other videos and features I'm going to do soon. I don't know. We kind of talk on the fly. Do you have any website or page to promote?
No, I don't. This was what I majored in college. I wrote my thesis on Chinese literature. It's just been an area that's always fascinated me, especially given my personal connection. So, I don't really have a page to promote or anything, but I do love talking about it with people, and it's been great being on your channel.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have you again, and we'll be able to go a lot longer on this, and I'm sure there will be some viewer questions. So I thank the guest again, Sun Fei Yang, for the time he's given, and please stay tuned. This is Bold Like a Leopard, and have a great night.